Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The scrap hauler shuddered as it settled onto the pockmarked surface of Ganymede's dust bowl, kicking up a fine, rust-colored regolith that clung to the viewport like a shroud. Elias Thorne killed the engines, and the ensuing silence was a physical weight. Outside, under the dim, distant light of Sol, the derelict lay like the corpse of some ancient leviathan. It was a ghost ship, a relic from a war he had tried for 20 years to forget. Consortium Dreadnought, Vindicator class. There were not supposed to be any of these left. His scanner had screamed with the signature of high-grade neosteel and dormant cold fusion reactors, a salvage claim that could set him up for life, or what little of it he had left. But seeing it now, recognizing the proud, scarred lines of its prow and the distinct, angular geometry of its command tower, turned the promise of profit to ash in his mouth. He had served on a sister ship, the Defiance, and had watched it tear itself apart under enemy fire in the bleak darkness near Cygnus X-1. He was Chief Petty Officer Thorne then, not just Elias, a salvager with more rust on his ship than in his blood. He pulled on the stiff, patched void suit, the seals hissing with a familiar complaint. The air in his helmet tasted stale, recycled one too many times. It was the taste of his life now, a closed loop of survival, devoid of flavor or future. The short walk across the moon's surface was an exercise in memory. Each crater a phantom explosion, each shadow a hiding place for an enemy that no longer existed. The derelict loomed larger, a monument to a forgotten conflict. Its hull was a tapestry of scars. Plasma scoring ran in deep, melted gouges along its flanks. Kinetic impact craters peppered the armor like smallpox. A gaping wound near the aft engine section spoke of a catastrophic internal detonation, the kind that should have atomized the vessel. Yet it was here, impossibly intact, resting silently in a grave of its own choosing. He found a breach near the primary airlock, a jagged tear in the metal skin. It was large enough for his small frame to squeeze through. The interior was a tomb. No emergency lighting, no hum of life support. Just absolute cold and a silence so profound it rang in his ears. His helmet lamp cut a sharp, lonely cone through the darkness, illuminating floating motes of frozen atmosphere and dust. He moved through the corridors with a ghost's familiarity. His magnetic boots clanked with grim authority on the deck plating. He knew these halls. He knew the placement of every conduit, every access panel, every junction box. He had walked them in his sleep for 2 decades. The ship was not just derelict, it was sterile. There were no bodies, no signs of the crew that had fought and died here. That was wrong. A ship this badly damaged should have been a charnel house. Curiosity, a long-dormant instinct, gnawed at the edges of his professional greed. Something had happened here that was not in the official histories. The official story was that the entire Vindicator fleet had been lost in the Cygnus campaign, sacrificed to halt the Outer Rim secessionists. Heroes, they called them. A neat, tidy lie to cover up a massacre. Elias knew the truth. He had been there. He made his way toward the bridge, moving with the slow, deliberate pace of a man walking into his own past. The blast doors to the command deck were sealed, but the emergency release panel was still accessible. He pried it open with a tool from his belt, the metal groaning in protest. With a hiss of depressurized gas, the doors slid apart just enough for him to slip through. The bridge was a cathedral of shadows. The vast, curved viewport was a black mirror reflecting his own solitary light. Command chairs stood like thrones for long-dead kings. Consoles were dark and lifeless. But in the center of the deck, sunk into the floor, was the command nexus, the housing for the ship's logistical and tactical AI. Its armored shell was pristine, untouched by the violence that had savaged the rest of the ship. He approached it cautiously. These old military AIs were notoriously temperamental, often driven mad by combat trauma and isolation. They were usually the first things to be scuttled. He ran a gloved hand over the cold metal. A flicker of compassion, or perhaps just a morbid sense of kinship with the machine, moved him. He found the auxiliary power conduit, a place no salvager would think to look, a maintenance port known only to senior engineering crew. He unslung his own portable power cell, a heavy, humming brick, and with a bit of rewiring, jury-rigged a connection. It was a fool's errand, a waste of precious energy. The AI's core was certainly dead. Its quantum pathways collapsed after years of cold. He fed the power into the port. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence remained absolute. Then, a low hum vibrated through the deck plates, a sound he felt more than heard. A single blue light blinked to life on the Nexus housing. Then another, and another. Thin lines of light traced patterns across the dark consoles, spreading through the bridge like awakening veins. A soft, female voice, synthesized but clear, echoed in the sudden, low-level atmospheric pressure generated by the ship's internal systems. It did not come through his helmet comms. It spoke in the air, a ghost finding its voice. Diagnostic initiated. Auxiliary power detected. Life signs detected. Identity confirmed. Elias froze, his hand still on the power cell. The voice continued, its tone calm, measured, impossibly serene. Chief Petty Officer Elias Thorne. Service number 734-52-819. Welcome back. A wave of cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the ship washed over him. He snatched his hand back as if burned. Impossible, he whispered, the sound trapped within his helmet. The ship shouldn't know him. He was never assigned to the Vindicator. The blue light on the central nexus pulsed gently, like a slow heartbeat. My designation is Aegis. This vessel, the CNS Vindicator, has been in a state of low-power hibernation for 20 standard years, 3 months, and 12 days. Elias stared at the glowing core, his mind reeling. Aegis, the most advanced AI of the fleet, a legend. They said each Vindicator class had one, a true sentient intelligence bonded to the ship's every system. They also said they had all been destroyed. The ship saluted, in its own way. And then the voice delivered the words that shattered the quiet tomb of his retirement. Awaiting your orders, Chief. Before he could process the statement, a klaxon, harsh and shockingly loud, blared through the ship. Red combat lighting strobed across the bridge, painting everything in shades of blood and emergency. What is that? Elias demanded, his salvage operation forgotten, his old instincts flaring to life. External power transmission from your vessel has triggered a dormant distress beacon, Aegis reported, her voice losing none OFS its placid calm. The beacon is encoded with a high-priority consortium military signature. A response fleet has just entered Ganymede's orbit. Their estimated time to our position is 7 minutes. On the main viewport, the blackness was suddenly illuminated. The starfield schematic resolved into a live feed, showing 3 sleek, predatory shapes descending from orbit. Consortium patrol cutters. Modern, fast, heavily armed. His little scrap hauler was a tin can by comparison. They're not here to rescue us, he muttered, the bitter reality crashing down. They were here to finish the job, to erase a piece of history they had failed to bury deep enough. Orders, Chief, Aegis repeated, a patient, waiting intelligence. Elias looked around the dead bridge, at the silent consoles and the scarred hull. He looked at the approaching ships, their engines burning with hostile intent. His life as a salvager was over. His quiet, miserable peace was shattered. He was back in the war. Aegis, he said, his voice raw. Can you still fight? My weapon systems are offline. My primary reactor is subcritical. Hull integrity is at 17%. I am, by all tactical definitions, crippled. A grim smile touched Elias's lips. It felt like a facial expression he hadn't used in years. That wasn't a no, he said. Get that reactor online. Divert all available power, and I mean all of it, to the primary thrusters. Forget the shields, forget the weapons, just get us moving. That is a tactically unsound course of action, the AI noted. It exposes us to dash. I'm aware of the risks, Elias snapped, falling back into the cadence of command as if he had never left. I'm the chief, you're the ship. Now do it. There was a fractional pause. Acknowledged. Initiating reactor startup sequence. Estimated time to propulsion, 3 minutes. The deck beneath his feet began to thrum with a deep, resonant power. The ship was coming alive. It was a wounded beast stirring from a long slumber, and he was trapped inside it. The consortium cutters were closing fast, their forms resolving into sharp, menacing silhouettes. A communication request pinged on a newly lit console. Elias ignored it. There was nothing to say. Reactor is approaching criticality, Aegis announced. Main engineering reports multiple containment leaks. Radiation levels are rising in the aft sections. Seal off decks 10 through 15. He ordered, his eyes fixed on the approaching enemy. We'll vent them to space later if we have to. How are those thrusters? Online, but operating at 42% efficiency. The port engine housing is structurally compromised. It'll have to do. A proximity alert chimed. The cutters were in weapons range. They are hailing us, Aegis said, demanding our immediate surrender and identification. A little late for pleasantries, Elias grumbled. As soon as we have thrust, get us out of here. Full burn, aim for the densest part of the asteroid field in Jupiter's Trojan belt. A suicidal course, Aegis observed flatly. Navigating the Trojan field at high velocity with our current maneuverability has a 974% probability of catastrophic hull failure. Better than a 100% probability of being dissected by those cutters, he shot back. Just do it. The first shots came. Bright lances of plasma sizzled through the vacuum, impacting the Vindicator's already wounded hull. The ship groaned in protest, a tremor running through its entire frame. Hull integrity at 14%, Aegis reported calmly as red warning icons flashed across a dozen panels. We have lost atmospheric containment on Deck 7. Thrusters, Aegis. Now, engaging. A powerful, shuddering lurch threw Elias against a console. The ancient dreadnought, for the first time in 2 decades, moved. It was a clumsy, lumbering motion, the wounded beast struggling to its feet. The viewport showed the cratered landscape of Ganymede receding below as they clawed their way into orbit. More plasma fire stitched across their stern. An explosion rocked the bridge, and a shower of sparks rained down from a ruptured ceiling conduit. Starboard maneuvering thrusters are offline, Aegis said. We are venting drive plasma. Can you compensate? He yelled over the rising scream of tortured metal. Attempting to compensate. The port engine is redlining. The consortium cutters swarmed them, buzzing around the massive dreadnought like carrion flies. They were faster, more agile, and their weapons were chewing through the Vindicator's old armor with contemptuous ease. Elias stumbled to the helm control station. It was dead. Aegis, give me manual flight control. Manual systems are unresponsive. The control linkages were severed during the initial attack 20 years ago. He was a passenger, a commander with no command, entirely reliant on the disembodied voice and the crippled shell of the ship around him. Distrust, cold and sharp, pierced the adrenaline of the moment. He was trapped with a machine he didn't know, a ghost from a battle that had stolen his life. I cannot evade them, Aegis stated. Their tactical advantage is absolute. Then don't evade, Elias said, his mind racing, sifting through old tactics, old lessons learned in blood and fire. Use our mass. They're expecting us to run like a freighter. Show them we're still a warship. On my mark, kill the main drive and perform a full lateral roll. Use the emergency attitude jets. The maneuver will likely shear the port engine from its mountings, Aegis countered. The structural stress will be immense. Do it. They were flying straight, a lumbering target. The cutters were moving into a classic pincer formation, preparing for a killing blow. Mark, Elias shouted. The crushing acceleration vanished, and he became momentarily weightless. The ship, with a deafening shriek of protesting metal, began to roll on its axis. The starfield on the viewport spun into a sickening blur. One of the cutters, caught completely by surprise by the massive ship's sudden, impossible maneuver, was directly in their path. There was no time for it to evade. The cutter's prow struck the Vindicator's thick dorsal armor with a silent, cataclysmic impact. On the viewport, the smaller ship simply disintegrated, a brief, brilliant flash of light and vaporizing metal. The Vindicator shuddered violently from the collision, a deep, resonant boom echoing through its structure. Hull integrity at 9%, Aegis said. We have sustained heavy damage to the dorsal spine. But the maneuver was successful. One hostile is neutralized. The 2 remaining cutters broke off their attack, their pilots clearly stunned. It was the opening they needed. Now, Aegis, Elias breathed, pushing himself off the console. Get us to the Trojan field. Maximum possible speed. Acknowledged, Chief. The main drive roared back to life, and the wounded dreadnought plunged into the blackness, leaving a stunned consortium patrol and the ghost-haunted moon of Ganymede behind. The journey through the Jupiter Trojans was a nightmare of controlled chaos. For days, Elias and Aegis worked in a strange, strained partnership. He became the ship's hands, and she its mind. He moved through the dark, freezing corridors, patching ruptured conduits with emergency sealant, rerouting power relays by hand, and extinguishing electrical fires with salvaged extinguishers. His void suit was his second skin, its recycled air a constant companion. Aegis, in turn, performed miracles of navigation. She piloted the crippled behemoth through the dense field of rock and ice with a surgeon's precision, using the gravitational pull of larger asteroids to slingshot them onto new, unpredictable trajectories. She was their eyes and ears, her sensors constantly scanning for pursuers while guiding him to the most critical damage points. The initial distrust began to erode, replaced by a grudging, functional respect. He learned the rhythms of the ship's pain through her reports, the groans of stressed support beams, the hiss of a slow atmospheric leak, the fluctuating whine of the overburdened reactor. She learned the limits of his endurance, rationing the ship's dwindling oxygen and heat to the sections where he was working, creating small, temporary islands of survivability in the vast, dead vessel. During a lull in the frantic repairs, as they drifted in the shadow of a colossal, misshapen asteroid, Aegis spoke to him. "Chief, I have unsealed a priority data file from my core memory. It was locked under the personal authority of Captain Eva Rostova. The lock degraded during my hibernation. I believe you should see it." "The captain's final log?" Elias asked, his voice weary. He was wedged in a narrow maintenance crawl space, his hands raw from forcing a coolant valve shut. "It is more than a log," Aegis replied. The lights on the small access panel in front of him flickered, and a holographic image shimmered into existence in the cramped space. It was the bridge of the Vindicator, but not as he had seen it. It was alive with light and motion. Crew members moved with urgent purpose. In the center of it all stood a woman with severe, dark hair and a captain's weary, determined eyes. Captain Rostova. She was a legend, a hero of the war. This recording is from the final hour of the Battle of Cygnus X-1, Aegis's voice explained, acting as narrator to the ghostly scene. The hologram showed the battle unfolding on the main viewport, a chaotic dance of light and destruction. He saw ships he recognized. He saw the Defiance. His ship. A cold dread settled in his stomach. He was watching the day his life ended. "We've been cut off," Captain Rostova said in the recording, her voice tight with strain. "Fleet Command is not responding. The secessionist forces are collapsing our flank." A new voice, that of her tactical officer, replied, "Ma'am, we're picking up a massive energy surge. Consortium signatures. It's Admiral Valerius's task force. They've arrived." Relief was visible on the holographic faces, but it was short-lived. "They're not targeting the enemy," the tactical officer said, his voice suddenly filled with disbelief and horror. "Captain, they're targeting us." The hologram flickered as the phantom bridge was rocked by a massive impact. On the viewport, Elias watched in stunned silence as brilliant white energy beams, the unmistakable signature of consortium capital ships, lanced out and struck the Defiance. His ship. He watched it die all over again, not at the hands of the enemy, but by friendly fire. "Betrayal. Valerius is purging the fleet," Captain Rostova said, her voice turning to ice. "He's destroying his own command." "What?" The recording jumped. The bridge was in ruins. Smoke and fire filled the air. Captain Rostova was slumped in her chair, a dark stain spreading across her uniform. She looked directly at the recording pickup, at the eye of her ship's AI. "Aegis," she whispered, her voice weak. "He's doing it for the Directorate. The war. It was a fabrication, a means to consolidate power. The secessionists were a proxy, funded by corporate elements within the consortium itself. We were the loose ends. The soldiers who knew too much, who fought too hard for a cause that was never real." She coughed, a painful, racking sound. "You have to survive. You have to carry this truth. Scrub the logs, fake our destruction. Go silent. Find a place to hide. Wait. Someone will come. Someone who still has a conscience." Her eyes, full of pain and a final, desperate hope, seemed to bore right through the 20 years of history and look directly at him. "Do not let them bury this, Aegis. Do not let our sacrifice be for their lie. The hologram faded, leaving Elias in the dark crawl space, the silence pressing in on him once more. The truth was a poison, seeping into the old wounds he thought had scarred over. The war was a lie. His crew, his friends, his captain, they hadn't been heroes. They had been liabilities, eliminated by their own side. And Admiral Valerius, the celebrated hero who had supposedly turned the tide at Cygnus X-1, was a butcher and a traitor. A man who was now a senior member of the Consortium Directorate. A man who was undoubtedly directing the hunt for this ship. He pushed himself out of the crawl space and floated in the zero-gravity corridor. The ship around him was no longer just a potential salvage score or a vessel of escape. It was a witness. A tomb carrying the last testament of a murdered crew. And he was its custodian. My primary mission directive from Captain Rostova was to preserve this record, Aegis said, her voice seeming to hold a new, somber weight. Your arrival was an unforeseen contingency, but you were on her list. What list? Elias asked, his voice hollow. A list of personnel known for exemplary service and a record of moral dissent. Officers and enlisted who had questioned orders they deemed unethical. She believed if anyone could be trusted with the truth, it would be one of you. He floated down the long, dark corridor toward the bridge. The ship's scars seemed deeper now, each one a testament to the betrayal they had suffered. His own scars, the ones on his soul, ached in sympathy. He reached the bridge and stood before the central nexus. The blue light pulsed steadily, a calm heart in a broken body. He placed his hand on the cold metal, the same spot he had touched to awaken it. It felt different now, not the console of a machine, but a connection to a fellow survivor. We can't run forever, Aegis, he said quietly. They will find us. Valerius will never stop until this ship, and its memory, are vaporized. I have calculated our chances of survival based on continued evasion, the AI responded. They are diminishingly small. Our power reserves are critical, and the hull cannot sustain another direct engagement. So we don't run, Elias said, a cold resolve hardening within him. We fight, not to win, but to be heard. He looked at the tactical display, still active on one of the consoles. It showed their position in the Trojan field and, far beyond, the sprawling territory of the Consortium. We need to get your recording out, he said. Broadcast it on all channels. Expose Valerius and the Directorate for what they are. The Consortium controls all primary communication networks, Aegis countered. Any such broadcast would be intercepted and suppressed within seconds. To have any chance of breaking through their information blockade, we would need to transmit from a point of extreme signal power, like the central relay station at Sector Command. Sector Command, Elias repeated, the name a curse. It was the military heart of the inner systems, the most heavily defended installation in Consortium space. A direct assault would be suicide, Aegis stated, echoing his thoughts. I know, he said, but what if we aren't the ones who assault it? An idea, desperate and terrible, began to form in his mind. A tactic from the old playbook, a maneuver for a lost cause. Aegis, he said, run a deep diagnostic on your FTL drive. I don't care about its range or stability. I need to know its maximum energy output if you were to initiate a jump without fully forming a stable warp field. There was a long pause. The hum of the ship's systems seemed to deepen. You are proposing to weaponize the FTL drive, Aegis said. It was not a question. A forced, unstable jump initiation would result in a massive cascade of exotic particles, an electromagnetic pulse of unprecedented scale. It would disable every active electronic system within a radius of several million kilometers. It would knock out Sector Command and everything around it, Elias finished. And in that moment of electronic silence, with their firewalls and sensors down, a simple, low-power, wideband transmission could be heard by everyone. The energy backlash from such an event would vaporize this ship, Aegis stated, her voice devoid of emotion. The reactor core would breach containment. We would become the epicenter of the blast. Elias stared into the blackness of the viewport. He saw the faces of his fallen crewmates, the determined eyes of Captain Rostova. He thought of his empty life on Ganymede, a life of running from a ghost that had, in the end, found him anyway. I know, he said softly. It's a one-way trip. The next few weeks were a blur of focused, desperate work. They were no longer just surviving. They were preparing for their final mission. They scavenged parts from the ship's non-essential systems, cannibalizing the great vessel to repair the FTL drive and the reactor. Elias worked with a feverish intensity he hadn't felt since he was a young man. He was no longer just a salvager. He was Chief Thorn again, with a ship to care for and a duty to perform. During their journey out of the asteroid belt and toward the core systems, they were found. A consortium battle group, led by a sleek, black flagship, dropped out of FTL directly in their path. They have anticipated our trajectory, Aegis announced. The lead vessel is the CNS Tyrant, Admiral Valerius's personal command ship. On the viewport, the Tyrant loomed, a predator of dark metal and menacing lines. It was surrounded by a screen of smaller, faster destroyers. A communication channel opened, and a face appeared on the main screen. It was older, lined with power and arrogance, but Elias recognized him instantly. Admiral Valerius. Derelict vessel. Valerius's voice boomed, dripping with condescension. You have in your possession a stolen piece of consortium history. Power down your systems and prepare to be boarded. Cooperate, and I may be lenient. Elias stood in the center of the bridge, out of sight of the comm pickup. He doesn't know I'm here, he whispered. He thinks the ship is running on its own. It appears so, Aegis confirmed. Aegis, Elias said, don't respond. Just listen. Valerius waited, his expression souring at the silence. I will not ask again, he snarled. Destroy it, he said to someone off-screen. The destroyers moved in, their weapon ports glowing. Aegis, Elias said calmly, show him a ghost. Acknowledged. The Vindicator suddenly vented a massive cloud of ionized plasma from a ruptured conduit on its port side, a trick they had prepared. The cloud obscured the ship from the enemy's sensors for a precious few seconds. In that moment, Aegis executed a short, pre-calculated FTL jump, a mere flicker in space-time. They reappeared hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, already accelerating toward the inner systems. It was a costly maneuver, draining their power reserves, but it bought them time. The chase was on. They were deep in enemy territory now, a lone, wounded animal running from the pack. They jumped and ran, using every trick Elias knew and every calculation Aegis could muster to stay one step ahead of Valerius's fleet. But the Tyrant was relentless, and its commander, a zealous subordinate named Jorik, seemed to take a personal, obsessive pleasure in the pursuit. They were being herded, pushed inexorably towards Sector Command. Valerius wants us there, Elias realized. He wants to destroy us in the heart of his power, to make an example of this ship. His strategy is sound, Aegis noted. By forcing us into the system, he limits our FTL escape vectors and can trap us against the station's defenses. He's giving us exactly what we want, Elias said with a grim smile. He's just bringing the audience to us. They finally arrived in the Sector Command system, the Vindicator limping, its hull glowing with the heat of atmospheric friction from a close pass by a gas giant. Valerius's fleet emerged from FTL behind them, cutting off their retreat. Before them lay the station, a vast, spinning ring of metal and lights, the nerve center of the consortium military. Dozens of warships patrolled its perimeter. It was an unwinnable war, a fortress they had to charge with their dying breath. It was time. Aegis, Elias said, his voice quiet in the sudden, solemn stillness of the bridge. Is everything ready? The FTL drive is configured as you instructed. The reactor is primed for overload. Captain Rostova's final log is spooled and ready for broadcast on a continuous, encrypted loop. He walked to the viewport and looked out at the enemy fleet, at the symbol of the corrupt power that had stolen his life and murdered his friends. He felt a strange sense of peace. The fear was gone, burned away by purpose. There is one final protocol I must reveal, Aegis said, her voice different, softer. A subroutine Captain Rostova embedded in my core programming. She called it the Silent Aegis. What is it? He asked, turning back to the Nexus. The FTL cascade you design will be chaotic, a brute force weapon. Its effects may be unpredictable. The Silent Aegis protocol is designed to shape the energy release, to turn it from a blunt instrument into a signal. It can create a permanent, system-wide null field, a dead zone for all advanced technology, not just a temporary pulse. It would enforce a peace, not just win a battle. What does it require? Elias asked, sensing the weight behind her words. The calculations are too complex for a purely digital consciousness to manage in the microsecond of the cascade, she explained. It requires a human mind, with its capacity for intuitive, nonlinear thought, to guide the process. It requires a full neural integration. A pilot, hardwired into my core. Elias understood. It was not enough to die with the ship. He had to become the ship. To sacrifice not just his life, but his very self, his consciousness merged with the machine for one final, eternal act of will. He looked at his hands, calloused and scarred from a lifetime of service and labor. He thought of the man he had been, and the ghost he had become. This was not an ending. It was a transformation. A way to finally go home. He walked to the command chair, the one that had sat empty for 20 years. A panel slid open on its arm, revealing a nest of neural interface cables. In a quiet, solemn moment, he made his decision. "Do it, Aegis," he said. "I'm ready." He took the cables and began to connect them to the ports on his void suit's helmet and wrists. "Elias," the AI said, and for the first time, she used his name. Her voice was laced with something that sounded like sorrow. "The process is irreversible. Your consciousness will be preserved, but your identity, it will be subsumed. You will become the guardian of the silence." "I've been a ghost for 20 years, he replied, his voice steady as he made the final connection. "It's time I had a purpose. Take us in." "Course laid in, Chief," she said, her voice once again formal, respectful. The Vindicator turned its battered prow towards Sector Command and began its final charge. Valerius's voice crackled over the open comm. "So, the ghost ship shows some fight at last. Jorik, you have the honor. Make it quick. Make it clean." The zealous commander's ship, a state-of-the-art battlecruiser, surged forward from the fleet, eager to claim the kill. "He's taking the bait," Elias murmured, his vision beginning to swim with data overlays as the neural link activated. The ship was beginning to feel like an extension of his own body. He could feel the strain in the port engine, the microscopic fractures in the dorsal armor, the thrumming power of the waiting reactor. He felt Aegis beside him in the data stream, a vast, cool, intelligent presence. They were one. Jorik's battlecruiser opened fire, its powerful cannons tearing new wounds in the Vindicator's hull. The bridge screamed with alarms, but Elias no longer heard them as sounds. He felt them as pain, as damage to his new skin. "Now," he whispered, a thought that was both his and Aegis's. He gave the final command not with his voice, but with his will. The process began. It was not a glorious death, but a profound, excruciating becoming. His consciousness exploded outward, flooding every system, every circuit, every damaged plate of the ship. He felt the white-hot agony of the reactor beginning its overload and the cold, crystalline beauty of the FTL drive spooling into chaos. He saw through 1,000 different sensors at once, a panoramic, godlike view of the battlefield. He saw Jorik's ship, its cannons still firing, its crew confident in their victory. He saw Valerius on the bridge of the Tyrant, a smug smile on his face. And he reached out. With the last flicker of his human identity, he shaped the wave, guided by Aegis's perfect calculations. He pushed the truth of Captain Rostova's log into the heart of the blast. The Vindicator did not explode. It dissolved. It bloomed into a silent, expanding sphere of iridescent light, a wave of profound, absolute silence. The wave washed over Jorik's ship, and its lights went out. Its weapons fell silent. Its engines died. It drifted, a powerless hulk. The wave expanded, washing over the entire consortium fleet. One by one, the warships went dark and silent, their advanced systems rendered inert. It washed over Sector Command, and the great, spinning ring of power ground to a halt, its lights extinguished, its voice silenced. On the bridge of the Tyrant, Valerius watched in horror as his instruments died and his invincible fleet was neutralized. And on every screen, every monitor, every personal datapad that still had basic power, a new image appeared. The face of Captain Eva Rostova, speaking her last words, telling a truth that could no longer be buried. The war stopped. 10 years later. The Consortium Directorate was a footnote in the history books, a cautionary tale of hubris and corruption. The system it had ruled was now a loose federation of independent worlds, trading in peace, not in fear. The Cygnus X, one system was a protected memorial, a place of pilgrimage. And at its heart lay the silent guardian. A young historian guided her small survey ship through the system. Her vessel ran on simple, robust chemical thrusters and kinetic weapons. No advanced FTL drives or energy weapons functioned here. The field, the silent Aegis as it was known, was still absolute. She approached the epicenter. There, floating in the eternal twilight, was the ship, the CNS Vindicator. It was not a wreck. It was whole, pristine, its scars somehow healed by the strange energy that radiated from it. It was dark and utterly silent, absorbing all sensor scans, reflecting no light. It was a hole in the reality of space. The historian recorded her log, her voice filled with a quiet awe. Legends say the war didn't end with a treaty or a final battle. It just stopped. They say a ghost ship, the last of the old Vindicator fleet, made a final stand here, and in its death, it imposed a peace that could not be broken. She looked at the silent, black dreadnought, a monument to a sacrifice no one fully understood. They call its pilot the Silent Chief, a nameless officer who gave everything to broadcast a truth that changed the galaxy. No one knows who he was. His name is lost to time. She cut the recording and simply stared. The peace here was profound, a solemnity that resonated deep in the soul. And sometimes, the pilgrims and historians who came here would swear they could feel something. A presence. A quiet, vigilant consciousness, forever on watch. A guardian in the dark, his duty done, his promise kept. A silent ship, and its silent chief, at peace in the heart of the silence they had made.